Welcome back. It's another episode of the Better Learning Podcast. I am going to have two school leaders that have been really about driving change in education, and I'm going to pull them right into the conversation because I'm sure we're going to talk about their latest book, but then also just education and leadership as a whole and driving that change. So Eric Sheninger and Nicki Slaugh, how are you?
We're doing well. I'm going to let Nicki go first because I'm going to piggyback on what she says. And she describes herself as a change maker.
Okay. Well, I just absolutely love everything about being in education in my career. So I've tried a variety of things. I was lucky enough to be an elementary school teacher first. So I taught kindergarten, first, second, and third grades. Then I was fortunate enough to be an instructional technology coach and work with teachers for about 4 years. And the past 8 years, I've been working with teenagers as a junior high principal. So I have loved every role that I do, and I love my students, and I just love this career. But basically, the main thing that I focus on from 20 years ago was just meeting the needs of all students, right? I just moving away from the one-size-fits-all approach and teaching more small group and one-on-one, because students come in our classrooms at different levels, and they all have different interests and learn different. So just being creative to not follow the status quo and just do the same thing day one, day two, and treat everyone like a robot.
Yeah, you literally just talked about all of our core values in that statement. So yeah, you can see on the shirt I'm wearing, it's we have this radically student-centered approach, and how do we foster that, and how do we really drive that cultural change away from what I think, some of the frustrations that has shown us, where it was more institutionalized and more about more the system than the student. So yes. Thanks for giving that intro, Nicki. Eric, why don't you go ahead, because for the people who are not familiar with your work.
Well, the irony here is we're talking about change makers, and I was as change adverse as they come. Conformity, compliance, control. And I don't know if you know this, Kevin, but I was a reality TV star in the education space back in the day. And I was on season 1 of The Principal's Office on True TV. And
what?
Right. Yeah. My kids always correct me, like, Dad, you're a reality star in the education space. But, you saw how fixed my mindset was. And, we often teach the way we were taught. We lead the way we were led. And it took a student telling me school was like a jail when I chased him through the halls of my building when he broke our cell phone policy. And that's kind of when I had my aha moment. And I'm like, listen, how can we prepare kids for the present and future if our mindsets are stuck in the past? As Nicki said, really talking about that one-size-fits-all approach. But I think that for me, I was victim of that's the way we've always done it. Or, hey, it's working. Yeah. So, fast forward after that moment, 5 years after that student told me that I was not a very good leader, we then began to learn how to unlearn and relearn. And we did things people told us we could not do in 2009, 2014, but we improved achievement in the process. We became one of the highest performing schools in the state of New Jersey for the first time ever. We did so many innovative practices, but as what Nicki said, everything was focused on meeting the needs of our kids. Were we perfect? Heck no. But we strived to grow every day.
So let's start there. So where somebody, let's say it's a principal, school administrator, superintendent is in there, and they're like, all right, this isn't going in the direction that I really want to go. What were the things that you did, or one of the things that you typically talk about of just let's starting point? What is the first thing that's needed to start driving that cultural change to more of a student-centered approach?
I think asking the right questions. And I think Nicki would agree with me on that. It's not about having all the answers. It's about understanding that there's no perfection in education. There's always an opportunity to grow no matter where we are. And when we think about our practice, why do we do things the way we do them? How might we do them better? And what tells us if we are successful? It's hard to answer those questions across the spectrum. And sometimes we are sort of blinded by our own bias, which is just human nature. Not that we're bad leaders or ineffective leaders, but we, get comfortable. Hugh Jackman in The Greatest Showman said his character, comfort is the enemy of progress. So we are often held back by comfort. We often are victim of not knowing what we don't know. And I think for me, that part of not just a student telling me that school is like a jail, but when I got on social media back in 2009, it was like a mind-blowing moment because I realized how much I didn't know, but that motivated me to want to be a more effective leader, first and foremost for my students, but also for my people. So questions, vulnerability, honesty, I think are three critical elements. However, I'm going to defer to the current school leader who's doing the work, and she'll probably have a much more nuanced, way to look at this.
Yeah, no, I basically, to be honest, I followed my heart. So everything that I had done in my elementary classroom, because in teaching first grade, students would come to me not being able to recognize letters and sounds, and I had other students that could read chapter books, right? And so I was like focused on how do I meet all their needs? I can't stand in front of the classroom the whole time. I need to figure out how to remove myself and be with the kids, right? So moving from that teacher-centered approach to student-centered approach, I had to focus on 20 years ago in an elementary classroom. So obviously I tackled it and challenged it and figured it out. Fast forward to now at the junior high, I started doing my walkthroughs. And I was like, goodness, we're still doing teacher-centered in a junior high. And you could tell that the kids were not engaged. They were compliant and they were bored, and attendance wasn't very high, as well as our grade point averages were really high, but our end of level test scores were really low. So I'm like, there is a disconnect. Something is just not working, right? So my biggest challenge was trying to figure out how to adjust the culture to where my students loved coming to school every day, especially teenagers, right? How do I get them engaged? What can I do to make them want to come to school, as well as my teachers? Because I feel like teacher-centered is more work. They're just doing all the talking, but there's no time to actually form relationships and connections with the kids. So it was basically trying to do what I did in elementary in a junior high setting. And I did just what Eric said. We would meet every Friday for professional learning and tackle problems and solve them with one thing in mind, every student, every day. And so every decision we made was about the student. How do we get them more engaged? What would make a teenager want to learn this concept, right? Which we'll talk about all the strategies in our book and today that I have implemented and that Eric has taught around the world also.
Yeah. Well, that's a good place to start on here because that when I look at this of like just disrupting education and looking at that as I look at it from a couple different viewpoints. I'm like, there are things that to me, like leadership is the fastest way to improve education right now. Like let's start at the top. And if we can, at each system and to be able to do that. However, the ones that like both of you that have kind of gone through that system, that's all you've ever known, right? Like, so we can't expect like pure disruption out of your role, right? Like you're the winners of this system, right? Like you've gone through school was good for you. You went through a teacher, you were a good teacher. So you get promoted and you go through there and you do that. So what is like truly like where are the things that you're looking at and really trying to challenge and be like, hey, we're not doing this right, even though we may have really good test scores. Something for you, Nicki, like triggered to be like, hey, we have good test scores, but this isn't really right. Like what was that aha moment for you to be like, we're actually going to change it, because everything about you was to keep the status quo, right? Like everything.
Not me. I wanted to get rid of it. I wanted to remove that teacher. I wanted small group and one-on-one. I wanted to do what I did in the elementary room in the junior high setting, right? So I first got rid of all points, percentages, extra credit. I wanted the game of school to stop. So my biggest thing was, as soon as I saw that the children were playing the game of school to receive their A, so their grade point averages were high, but their test scores were not. That's how I knew there was a problem. They weren't actually learning. So the focus was, how can we actually focus on learning versus just providing the same assignment to every student, giving the test the same day, having everybody follow the same pace, have everyone learn the same way, right? So it was, I need to really disrupt all that and get my current teachers that I didn't choose because I had asked to transform the school. So in that position, I had teachers that they didn't have the same vision as me, right? Here I came in and was like, we got to shake things up. No more points or percentages. I want students to actually participate in your science lab to learn. for the sake of understanding, not for the point.
So that's what I want to get to the heart of. Like, what was that was in you that said this isn't good enough?
Just
like what was that aha moment where you're like they're not learning. This isn't the most effective way to do this, because that takes a lot of courage.
Yeah, it was just in the drop-in. I found myself not being able to follow along past 10 minutes because nowadays with our phone, you know what I mean? I was thinking, if I can't sit for 45 minutes for a lecture, how do I expect the kiddos? And then when I saw kids laying down and they were quiet, but they really weren't listening, I knew within like 10 seconds. I don't know. I just was like, we can't do this.
How about you, Eric?
Yeah, I think when we look at that aha moment, it's, how do we understand whether or not the status quo is really helping to meet the needs of everyone in the system? So I go back to my story of when that student told me school was like a jail. And ultimately, perception is often reality. We had a perception as adults that everything was going great, that we were doing a good job. But that one student kind of got me thinking, and I'm like, maybe we aren't as effective as we think. That's when I use digital tools to poll all of our student body to collect that actual perception data as to where our kids really felt. And it was probably the most difficult thing I ever did as a school leader, because their feedback really, it hurt in a good way, because it was that gut punch that got me to challenge conventional wisdom. If we want to learn and grow, we need to challenge conventional wisdom and, really think about who are we trying to serve in schools. When you think about a leader, as leaders, you're serving, the adults and you're serving the students. And by adults, you're also serving the community. Sometimes what the community wants flies in the face of what students actually need. And we were faced with that too. When we started to change, everyone was questioning, why are you going bring your own device? Why are you doing flipped classrooms? Why are you betting time where kids get out a half day for PLCs? So we had to do a lot of handholding and a lot of education of our parents. But I think it was really, for me, it was getting to the heart of, where are we as a school community? But where do we need to go for our learners? And it really came back to asking those right questions.
All
so
right.
To piggyback him, I would ask the students, why are you tardy? Because a lot of teenagers are tardy to class. And it was an easy answer. The class is boring. I don't see the purpose. So those are the discussions we would have. And then as I started to ask the teachers, what do you think of the current curriculum you're using, or the different things they've been doing? They started opening up, saying that they have these grand ideas, but they felt that they hadn't been treated as professionals, because they were always told, this is what you do, follow this program. So when they actually had voice, and when students had voice, when they could say, hey, I think we should try this, and I would listen. And so we would have an environment where it was okay to fail. Let's try things and figure out what will help students be engaged. That helps. So valuing teachers as professionals, because they're actually in the classrooms where they make the magic happen. So listening to them and choosing curriculum based off of their needs, not just based off what we think, right? What their experiences are and what they can find, as well as interviewing students on, well, how do you prefer to learn? What are your interests? And some students that were bored, it was either too challenging or not challenging enough, right? And so that's why our pacing comes in, where we're going to allow kids to do 2 years of math in 1 year if they want. Or we're going to allow them to choose to learn from a teacher, learn from a podcast, or watch a video. So just listening to the students and the teachers, and then meeting every week, to try things.
Yeah, I love that. So continue the story then, Nicki, if you wouldn't mind, of you're recognizing this, you're getting the voices, you're recognizing that this isn't the way it's done. It needs to be done. We're going to change things. You mentioned the fact that, you didn't choose your staff, you're coming in. So what was that process like? What were the things you were looking at to say, okay, this is working, we're making progress? What were the things that were going through your mind as you're driving kind of this change of culture?
So year one, we focused on culture. I didn't touch anything academics. I felt like if I can get the buy-in I wanted an environment where every employee loved their job and they wanted to come to school and they felt supported, and every student as they came in the door felt loved and accepted, right? And so number one was creating this happy, engaging environment for everyone to attend. Our test scores actually increased tremendously without even touching academics, just by switching the focus. The previous administration had detention every day. Every 3 detentions is suspension. So just changing the whole mindset of leading with love versus fear. That was step one. Then I knew by November of that year, I needed to switch the academic side, right? So then we started focusing right after Christmas on, we are going to switch to more of a mastery base or competency base. So we chose to start with, there's all different ways, but we chose to start with developing the competencies and creating proficiency skills, because teacher clarity is so important, so that teachers identify what they're teaching and students know what they're going to learn, why they're going to learn it, and where they're in the learning process. So we chose to start with proficiency skills. So we all had a guide based off the state standards.
Okay.
I can keep going, but I'll stop there and you can ask questions.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so my next question would be wrapped around that, be like, okay, you got the foundation, because I agree with you. I feel like culture is everything. I always use like, my job is actually like in the learning environment. So when we got into it, and I got into this industry like 15 years ago, I didn't know what we were doing. I just got into an accident. And then I finally saw a teacher actually teach the way that seemed to be like engaging and effective. And that was about 10 years ago, like 2014, where I walked into that classroom, like, whoa, this is different. And all of a sudden realized, wow, what we do as a company really matters. That whole learning environment, it affects it. But it really, when we started looking at like, how do we do that more? It wasn't really about the learning environment. If we actually started going higher, it was about the leadership, allowing the teachers to approach things differently. And it was about the leadership creating the culture that fostered this. So
leaders have to be the energy they want to attract, right? So everyone stems off us all day long. So, and then I tell my teachers, obviously I have to be the energy for the teachers as well as the students, but then they have to be the energy for the students, right? It's just kind of like teamwork. So yeah, we removed, as a classroom environment, like year one, I got rid of every single desk, teacher desk, student desk. I only wanted tables and whiteboard tables. And I explained to my teachers, there's really no time to sit down at your desk. You're either circulating or providing feedback or conferencing or small group working one-on-one. So just kind of teaching them how to connect and build relationships up front in that sort of environment versus standing in front of the room and kids in rows. So yeah, that was like a really important.
Yeah. So as you're building that culture, like, did you get opposition to that?
I did. There was a group of teachers that felt like points were everything. And I'm not totally against points. That's just what I chose to remove to try to get the focus on learning, because I felt students were always like, what do I need to get that A? Or I need 300 points to pass. It really wasn't. I would love to learn that concept. Will you provide me a reteach? So I just wanted to shift the conversation. So that's the angle I went with. But some teachers felt like points and due dates were so important, and they liked the missing assignment, and they put the blame on the children more, because they'd be like, oh, if they don't do it, it's not my problem, which that's fine. That's their philosophy. I said, well, at Quest, what we focus on the student. So if the student didn't learn it the first time, then we need to identify how do we reteach it a different way, right? So it's just kind of asking them, what their vision and values are in education. And those that truly had that why of seeing the light in the child's eye loved the new vision and wanted to stay and felt empowered to switch it. But I'm not going to lie, I lost a few that thought it would be more work, when in the end, if you ask my teachers, moving to personalized approach is actually more meaningful and purposeful work, and they go home happy and the students are happy. So it's easier than taking piles of papers home and scoring and inputting grades all day and feeling like you have a headache because you're nagging at children to turn in missing assignments, right? Yeah. So you kind of pick the battle.
Yeah, well, I definitely want to hear about that, but Eric, I'm going to pull you into when you're going through this transition. Were you getting similar objections?
Well, I think it's a lot more broader than that. When we think about leadership, and we think about change, we have to understand that people are scared of change. They're not automatically open to it. So, the only group that likes change at scale are wet babies. That's about it. But when we think about change, it is, leadership isn't telling people what to do. It's taking them where they need to be. Leadership isn't about selling the next big idea. Leadership is about showing people the value. Here is why this will make you better. Here's how you can do it effectively. Here's what will tell you if you're successful. You know, in a collective bargaining state, I had to deal with tenure, which is a whole nother animal, you know, job for life. So we knew that, hey, yeah, we could go and look at buy-in, but that was going to be a short-term fix. And, you know, for larger things that might have been top down, we had to get people to buy in. But after reading Drive by Dan Pink and really thinking about intrinsic motivation, we had to get people to, again, and we talk about this in our own book, we had to get people to go through the change process at their own pace within reason. Because if people are doing the work because they want to, because they see that it's going to make an impact, they have that sense of value, then those people are driving the change. You know, a misconception is that the leader has to direct and do all the work. No, effective leadership is about action, not title, position, or power. So for us, we empowered the true leaders in our building. We empowered our teachers. We empowered our students. And yes, maybe myself and my assistants got the ball started, but when you think about success, it's not what we did with the titles. It's what the people did. And when you think about effective leadership, modeling is important, but so is building capacity. If you want results, you need to build capacity so that everyone has that sense of value, but then they, quote unquote, police themselves. They hold each other accountable. And then the feedback process becomes more of a dialogue as opposed to a monologue. And feedback, when we think about culture, you know, Nicki and I talk in our book, risk-taking, collaboration, feedback, and professional learning. Those 4 elements are critical if you truly want to be a change maker.
Yeah, that's great. I completely agree with all of this, which is why we spend so much time like on the leadership side. I'm going to ask you some questions that make you uncomfortable, but so don't answer if you don't want it to. But for you to be able to have that autonomy to do that within your school, what was a message you were getting from the district?
I think we're going to have 2 different perspectives on it. So I'm going to let Nicki go first, and then I will share mine, because I always say that my perspective is not something that I would truly recommend unless you want to get your hand slapped. But Nicki, you share your perspective, and I'll add my 10 cents.
Well, so I'm currently in a charter system. So I do have an active school board. So I just had to sit down with the school board and the stakeholders and kind of talk about the vision and the plan, right? Which was focusing on students and student learning and having students be engaged and want to come to Quest. So those were my goals, right? And so I provided my vision step by step. Like, we will have high expectations. Students will master these standards with these proficiency skills. They'll be able to identify where they're at in the learning process. If they do not pass it the first time, then we will provide reteach, one-on-one feedback until they pass it, right? So I was letting them know we're taking a different approach. It's not, what does 18 out of 25 mean to them, the parents, the student? Like, what does it really do, right? So I just kind of shared the vision of starting with the competencies and the proficiency skills and how we have high expectations with learning, and kind of explain that. And all of us had went through the point system. So I felt like they were really open to this, because they also, you know, were in a traditional system. So once they heard the focus was on learning, number 1, they really loved it. Step 2, they wanted to know, well, how are you going to do that? How is that possible? And so then I just kind of shared the variety of ways and said it will be a learning process each year with the teachers. I didn't have the whole thing figured out in 1 year. This is my 8th year doing it, right? And had teachers come and share, have students come and share. So we just had to go to a school board and just kind of share our plan and say that we wanted to take a risk. And I was fortunate because my school board was ready for change, because we did have low test scores and we were not retaining students. I was told you need to improve test scores, retain teachers, and we had 25 ninth graders, but 100 sixth graders. So as you can see, enrollment was decreasing as the years went on. They were losing students. So those were the three things they told me. We want 400 kids across the board, 100 per grade. We want the test scores to be the state and the surrounding schools, and we need teacher retention. So what's your plan? So I should have started with that. But that was the school board's plan when they hired me. Then I shared the vision and said, let's shake things up and do things differently.
Yeah.
There are certain truths in education. Here's two. Number one, there is no such thing as a best way to do things or best practice. If there were, we'd all be doing it with a high degree of fidelity and getting amazing results. A second truth is education globally. We have a lot of room to grow in getting rid of ineffective teachers and administrators. It doesn't happen. Education, you can, with tenure, even states with non-tenure, there's challenges of that. So what does that mean? Well, what are you afraid of? If you're really going to do what's best for kids, are you really going to lose your job if you are effective? So I had my hand slapped countless times and I got tongue lashings, but here was sort of like the silver lining. We were able to show our results. So yes, maybe district level leadership was not particularly happy that the perception was like I was this lone wolf in the district, but that perception carried no weight when the New York City media was at our school all the time covering our innovative practices. When we won awards for improving achievement, tops in the state, tops in the country. So what I learned really fast was if I am doing my job, I can't control how other people will see it. I can't control what other people think of me. And in the beginning, I was so concerned about what other people thought and not about what truly was important. And I think leaders, we didn't get into the profession to sit on our hands. We didn't get in the profession to be a leader, to say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am. We didn't get into the profession to do things the way we've always done them, because a manager can do that. And there's a big difference between managing and leading. So email, making people happy. You want to make people appreciative of the culture that they have. You want people to come to work enthusiastic. You want people not to see it as another thing they have to do, but something that they take pride in doing. So, I tell people in one sense, you know what? What could really happen to you if you do these bold moves? But I'm also a realist. And I will say this, I had tenure. I started this without tenure, by the way, but eventually I had tenure. I was president of the leadership bargaining unit. But again, I think we have to look at what does it really mean to be a leader and how do our actions inspire others to be the best iteration of themselves.
And the difference between charter and district. So yes, I really only had to get buy-in from my school board, right? People are choosing to go to a charter system, but we're more like a business. I have to keep enrollment, right? Parents and families have to drive their kids to my current school. There isn't a bus system to bring them. We also do not have tenure. So I could be fired any year. My contract and all of my teachers' contracts are 1 year. So it is more risky to work in a charter system, right? But at the same time, it's a business, and I was told to make change, meaning we need to improve test scores, increase enrollment, and retain teachers, right? So in order to do that, then I was willing to take that risk. And so were my teachers, just to kind of figure out what we could do, because we wanted to keep people choosing to come to Quest over their surrounding schools. That's just how charters work. You do kind of have to look at it as a business. So I think it was more empowering for me to be like, I've got this. What can I do different? Because obviously with school of choice options, the surrounding schools are doing fine, right? We have great community schools, especially with athletics and extracurricular and different things. So what are we going to offer that's different to make parents actually drive every day, drop off their kids at 8, pick them up at 3 when we have a community where parents work, right? So just kind of a different angle. We had to look at it as a business, and it was a big risk because we all have 1-year contracts. So if we didn't produce results, we could lose our job, right?
And Nicki, did you start your career in a charter system?
I did 10 years in the public school system. So,
okay. Yeah.
So I've experienced both, but I applied these all in my elementary classroom. I mean, I feel like centers and differentiation districts are more open in an elementary setting for us to differentiate the way the daily schedule is laid out, right? You have multiple hours you're teaching reading and writing, and multiple hours you can teach math. Where when you move to secondary, that's when we get more to that direct instruction because you only have an hour with each kid. So it's helping the teachers, work on time regulation and time management and using their time effectively, keeping their mini lessons short or providing a flipped approach. I mean, a lot of my teachers create TikToks. For example, if they were teaching how to write an essay, they'll do mini TikToks explaining the different stages versus talk at them for 50 minutes, right? So it's just kind of meeting the needs of your current age group and being in the 21st century learning, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, so there's a couple things in there that stand out to me. It's the element of what you both hit on. There's a level of you kind of have to manage above and below you at the same time. In education, like the greatest leaders that I've seen are the ones that really are good at not. Like whether it's someone at a district or a board or wherever it is, of being able to manage and be able to work with them together on that, so that it doesn't become they're just executing on what they've been told to do, because there is this collaborative effort of like being able to manage the one above you. The other piece of that is the saying that I've said all the time, whether it's in business, anywhere, it's for the most part, if you like your manager, you like your job. Mm-hmm. And that is a really big component of most people's reality. As much as, you don't want to use even the word manager or leader or
boss. And if you like your
whatever.
Teacher, you'll learn, right?
So if you exactly, and that's where it starts flowing down in the same way through. Obviously, education has a little different component to that, but it's like if there is trust, and if the if the kids really feel like teacher loves them and cares about them, they're going to perform better.
You hit the nail on the head. I was going to interject and push back a little bit on the liking part, because I think that sometimes where leaders get in trouble, they focus so much on getting people to like them, and sometimes the substance lacks. But when you talk about trust, without trust, there's no relationship. Without relationships, no real learning or progress occurs. And yes, liking can be part of trust, but you need respect. You need commitment. You need dedication. You need honesty. And when you have transparency is one of the best ways to bring about trust. It comes back to those questions, the why we do these things, how we do it effectively, what tells if we're successful. So I just think we got to tread lightly with the liking part, because I know that that's what held me back initially. I wanted everyone to like me. And that kind of pulled at the fabric of my trying to being effective, which is the real goal.
Yeah, that's a great point to do that, because I do think that's the first thing that a new leader goes into is I want everyone to like me, and they fall into that trap where if you look at any of the successful leaders, they got a little bit of an edge to them, but it's still built around trust and be like, I know this person cares about me and wants the best thing for me, even if it doesn't always come and feel like, they really like me, like they are challenging.
Another key word, Kevin, trust and care, and it comes back to that sense of feeling valued. We want people to see the value in doing things which could be disruptive. They could be different. They could be innovative. They could be new, but caring, empathy, trust, those are the intangible elements of leadership. And we think about leadership as a Swiss Army knife. There isn't one best way to lead, but you have to look at what are those effective elements of leadership and understand that in some cases, one of those elements might not be the most effective approach.
All right, I'm going to ship in one more topic, and then I got a little more fun, lighter stuff, but like bigger picture stuff. But when you're doing that, and I think you both have different perspectives, whether it's in a district or charter, you have tenure. There is an element where like not everyone's gonna, to use John Gordon's language that we've had talking about. It's not everyone's going to be wants to be on the bus or is going to get on the bus.
Yeah.
So the idea that you have to get people in the right seats and on the bus and moving in the same direction, education is like the oddest industry in that it's typically a one-way decision. Like the person who they only have the option to opt in or opt out. It's very hard for a school leader or principal to make that choice for themselves. How have you guys dealt with that when the ones where it's just like, what, this isn't a fit, we need to make a move, I need to level up my team, that students deserve someone better at their job? Well, what do you do in that situation?
And I'm going to set Nicki up for this because she does an incredible job creating a culture that people want to be a part of because of her willingness to model. But, let's again look at some realities. Typically, it's 5% that give you 95% of the problems. And here is a reality. You will not get everyone on the bus. Just like you will not engage every single learner in a classroom because you can't control what's going on outside of the school, what's out of the system. The key is, how do you create the conditions to empower the majority to grow their practice? And you have to get creative. This is one thing they do not teach you when you're becoming a school leader, is they teach you about conflict resolution, but not the nuts and bolts of getting rid of an ineffective staff. And that could be a teacher, that could be an administrator. But I think when it comes down to it is you have to look, and every situation is different. The tools that I had at my disposal to, again, after support, and we are not here to say you just get rid of someone because you don't like them or they did something wrong one day. If they're not open to feedback over a period of time, then you need to make a decision. Okay, well, what we do? One thing that we did is we transferred people. We gave them a change of scenery as sort of a last resort. And if their certification allowed it, I would take someone from the elementary and a high school person would go down to the elementary so we could grow them. If that didn't work, then they were faced with a decision. So we kind of put some pressures on people to do that. But that's the hardest part of this job, is because, these are people, emotions are involved. But when we think about it, some people are not cut out to be in education. But I will say this before turning it over to Nicki, you have to provide people practical, specific, targeted feedback with examples of where and how they can improve. And you need to give them time to act on it. If they do not, if it's a right to work state, you have your paperwork, you fire them. If it's a tenure state, you can file tenure charges. You can petition the board to withhold salary increments, which is another tool that we utilized, or you can transfer people. But I want Nicki to share some of the things that she does to really have her staff see. And I mean, she's going to tell you what she does on Fridays. See, I didn't say it, Nicki. I'm going to let you talk about what you do on Fridays. I'm also going to set up what she's done with the schedule for the biggest impediment to change that we hear, time. Go ahead, Nicki.
Okay, first off, I really encourage my teachers to support each other. So we have this program called Teachers Supporting Teachers. So on their prep periods, they have these punch cards. So the first semester, and they go in and they observe each other, whether it be a different grade, a different subject. I want my students to see the teachers supporting each other and being in the classrooms, as well as myself, right? So they can see that we're a team. So I think it's really important up front for teachers to observe each other and allow them to take 15, 20 minutes of their prep and actually go observe and find fabulous finds and share with them what they loved, right? And then, so we set it up that way where they're constantly supporting each other and dropping in on each other. I also set it up where I make sure that everyone on my team, I've identified every person's strengths up front, so they know that we all are a piece that fits in the puzzle. Okay, because we all have different strengths. We're all not going to be the same, just as our students. And so I identify their strengths. I encourage them to watch each other, which is really important. And then on Fridays, every Friday we do professional learning. So I get to meet with them for 45 minutes, whole staff. Then we have subject matter as well as grade level. So we have 3 different faculty meetings on Fridays with meaning and purpose. Obviously, in grade level or subject matter, you could be looking at data, right, and meeting the needs of kids. But in whole group, we start with celebrating wins. So then where our teachers have been in each other's classrooms, that's the time where they can share a video or a picture or just share what they've seen within a classroom or in a hall. So we're constantly praising and celebrating the good things that are happening. Another thing during the block with me is if we identify any problems, this is where we tackle it again as a team. So I may identify some problems, or they bring it to my attention. Then we divide up in groups and we decide right then, instead of waiting till the next year, let's tackle this problem and come up with solutions. So this time with me is I want to work right with those teachers every single week, help them solve their problems, help them feel empowered and respected and praise them, right? So I think that's really important, because then I want them to do the same for our students in the classrooms.
2 things I want to add to her response, because I think she's being a bit modest. She facilitates professional learning. She doesn't sit on her hands. She plans, and every Friday is a hands-off day. How do I know this? Because I coached in this school for 2 years. I could never come on a Friday. Hands off. The other thing, Kevin, you talk about the difficult decisions, whether it's mid-year or end of the year. Nicki doesn't shy away from making the decisions on personnel that are in the best interest of the kids, even if it's going to be a headache for her. Sorry, I had to add that.
No, it's fine. So I like to look at myself as an instructional leader. I feel like teaching is not just what I do, it's who I am. It's embedded in me. So I look at my staff as my students, right? So I'm constantly providing the professional learning. And to be honest, I never did let anyone else train my teachers until I met Eric. So he's very lucky, because I was very picky, but he won me over and I was very impressed with him. So I allowed him to come in to not only provide some professional learning, but give me feedback, because sometimes as leaders, we don't have anyone give us feedback, right? So Eric is right. I take pride in performing all of my professional learning, and I love doing that. I think it's important to work with the teachers always, versus just be the principal and maybe just have the instructional coaches work with them. I think it's important that we're all a team, every single one of us on the staff. So that's important. And when it comes to hard decisions, those students come first. And I lay that out in my interviews with my teachers. My students know that's our motto, that's our focus. So if for some reason there is a teacher that is not meeting the needs of kids for a variety of reasons, and I might have to make a very tough decision in October or February, I don't care if it's 2 p.m. in the afternoon, I do it, because I truly believe that you're only as strong as what you allow. So as leaders, if you're allowing a couple of teachers to lower the bar and do some things, that you don't feel fits your motto or your vision, then everyone's gonna sink to that, right? So I think it's really important. Really, to be honest, I don't have to do that very often. The culture that we've created is, we believe in being the 1% doing what 99% won't do. That's totally how I believe. Everyone on my staff believes that. If by chance somebody comes in and they don't want to do that, they identify on their own just by supporting the teachers and being in the group. So then they make the decision on their own that maybe Quest isn't the right fit. Does that make sense? So I don't have to always do the work, because the culture's already set. We are the 1%.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. And I think we can all agree that's pretty rare in education. That there's actually a system in place that you could do that. Mm-hmm. But then also the fact that you are doing it too. Mm-hmm. So kudos to you. Because I think that's one of the things that, unfortunately at a systemic level needs to be addressed. Like, I think if we're just as blatantly honest about is the fact that we are paying teachers more money a lot of times for when they're retired than when they're actually working. And I do think we have to address that, because I'm seeing it. I'm in my late 40s. I'm seeing my friends and my peers that are in education. They're switching. Their mindset is now switched, because they know that the big reward of their work is coming, and they start looking and be like, oh, that's in 9 years. That's in whatever that is. And I think it's a flaw in the system, and we created the system, and I think we need to address this.
Well, I look at this. I tell my teachers every day, we're in charge of other people's children, their pride and joy. They're with us for 8 hours a day. So that is a really big responsibility, right? And so I think once they actually sit down and look at it that way, like that 8th grader will never get this 8th grade year again, So I think it's just actually realizing it's not just a job. Teaching is a job of service, not just a job. And so, not as most people come at the beginning. If you rewind, it was hard to get people to come to charters in Utah. I don't know how it is in other schools. Yeah. It was kind of looked down upon, right? Mm-hmm. But now people are coming to me because really those 1%ers, they want to surround themselves with the 1%ers. So they want to work for me because they're tired of the 99% or the 5% that are even below that, just continuing to move up the level, you know what I mean, by doing less work when it's just about tenure. So it's not anyone's fault, but the system, there are some flaws.
Ultimately, I mean, I'm not in the system, so I can call people out a little bit more easily on there, but it is. I mean, either somebody built that system or somebody's protecting that system. And I do think if we really want to do the larger scale, now, obviously we're seeing the movement of charter schools and a bunch of different alternatives. I call it the fragmentation of what's going on, and it's there for a reason. Like, we have to acknowledge that. And I think the public school system has to recognize what is going on. And my fear is that they're not recognizing until it's too late. And, like I said, it's a much bigger issue than the three of us. I think the work of focusing more on the students is obviously more like immediately impactful and rewarding to be focusing at that level. But at the system level, it does need to be addressed.
Well, and we wrote the book with that in mind. Obviously, we know that not everyone's going to have Eric's experience or my experience, right? So we wanted to provide different strategies and tools in the book that a teacher or a leader could take right back and implement right then, depending on their situation. So that was actually probably the hardest part for me in writing the book, was kind of making sure that how we wrote it was for a large audience. So no matter what system they're in or what grade they teach, they could actually implement it. And so we did make sure that we did that it wasn't just a one size or take that big risk, right? Just the book focuses on meeting the needs of all students and providing multiple chapters and ideas so that people could actually take something, read it, and go implement it next year, right? Yeah.
To me, like, the more we can talk about this and reiterate the fact that if you teach for 20 years and you decide you don't want to do it anymore, there's nothing wrong with that. That doesn't make you a bad person. That doesn't mean you were a bad teacher. That just means that is a normal course of people's lives. There's no reason at the age of 22, people should be making a decision that now dictates the next 40 years of their life without deciding if they still want to do that or not. And I think too much in our system is just built in to be like, we are making it so hard for people to opt out on their own. And sometimes that's just normal. If you look at any other industry, it is very normal that people make career changes. And but we are holding so many rewards.
Eric, you can share how the book is also to provide hope and to have teachers fall in love with their job again, right? And just
not teachers. We're talking about with administrators too. If an administrator determines that this is not the right course of action, and the whole idea is to get people to question their practice. And part of it's validation, I think with anything, like even with this podcast, it's how do we validate effective leadership, how to effectively implement change. The fact that what one person does is not necessarily what the other person has to do. And, in Personalize, we focus on personalization of learning, but we also have to personalize our practice and understand that there isn't a one size fits all approach when it comes to being a change maker, or writing curriculum, or developing an assessment, or facilitating a faculty meeting. So, the whole idea here when we think about change is we got to show ourselves as leaders some grace, and we have to be patient. Change is a process. It's not an event. It's going to take time.
Perfect. Well, that's going to kind of wrap up, or as I close up here. But to that point of time, I mean, to hear, Nicki, how long you've been in your role, it's one of the reasons why we started Education Leaders Organization, ELO, a handful of years ago, as we were looking at it, and the tenure of people in the superintendent role was 2.9 years. So if somebody's going to be in there for 2.9 years, we know that first year it's about just really building out that culture. Like it is this whole idea that by the time they get to the point where they can actually drive that change, their turnover has already happened.
Well, and sometimes they shift principles a little bit too fast. I agree with you. It takes time.
It does. Yeah. So that time is really important. To let it play out. All right. So I want to talk about this because Eric, you mentioned being a reality TV star. On that show, and that's actually like one of my biggest passions we actually started a nonprofit around this, of how do we improve education through the use of media and storytelling. And I think in just like the general public, for anyone who like thinks about school or anything like that, it's typically baked into either their experience in school, whether it was 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, or what they see in TV and movies, and how much like that idea of Ferris Bueller of people sitting in rows and falling asleep and drooling on desk still is like the predominant image of what schools look like, even though the ones of us who have been in schools recently know it looks completely different. So I want to hear your experience of being a reality TV star, like around that. How much, like I want to hear like your experience in that, because I feel like the general public needs to see school differently.
Yeah, and the problem was we were showing school through the lens of what people thought it should be, and that was one of the challenges. And I think that I love that experience because I've been called out. Well, I used to be called out for it. They're like, how can you be this guy on True TV and now be doing all these innovative approaches? And it was interesting as we were going through kind of scripting, and they were all real scenarios. We kind of reenacted them, but they wanted the ones that were mostly about discipline, and they didn't really get to the substance of all the amazing things that take place in schools. And that's where a part of me is ashamed, because I was young back then. I mean, this was going back, oh my goodness, almost 20 years ago. And I think we learn, and that's one thing we learn from experience. So I think the reality we have to, we say now with AI and what we see online is we got to take a critical lens to that. And I think how the education system is portrayed, whether it's reality TV or dramatic TV, it doesn't do justice to what really goes on. When you think about the dedication of teachers, you think about all the different roles of building leaders, system leaders. And I think for us it's not creating a reality TV for schools. It's really being able to showcase what is actually taking place. If you don't tell your story, someone else will. And if someone else tells your story, it's not the one that we want told. One thing that I've written over the years about is about being the storyteller in chief, and that we can control the narrative, but we have to be bold. We have to be consistent. And we also have to empower other people to shift their work so that we can be the programming that parents, stakeholders, politicians, and Nicki's done a great job of this. I mean, the Utah legislature has gone to visit her school, multiple times. So I think, again, it's how do we leverage the mediums that we have to educate people on the reality of our schools.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, like around our nonprofit initiative, we started filming. We actually have an amazing film crew there in Utah. They're in Salt Lake. So that may be something we follow up with you, Nicki, and have our film crew go out there, because these stories need to be out there. People need to have a different view.
And we're really fun because I really like to dance. So I have music in the hall. So I may have really high expectations within first period and second period, but in between they better be dancing, right? So we have some fun. Don't worry. I want to make sure that, you know, everyone just can be themselves and be free. And so you'll see some fun stuff when we provide tours. They're always impressed with just the lack of structure during certain periods of the day, right? They're just like, you don't expect them to be quiet, walking to the halls, doing these certain things. And I'm like, absolutely not. That's their one time. So we have a no cell phone policy within the classroom. But then when that bell rings, the music is on, they can have their phones. But then you enter that classroom. Okay, now we're back to business. They're having choice in how they want to learn. They have voice. They're working at their own pace. You can never find a teacher. So when you walk in the room, they're always eye to eye with the student. So that's the best thing, is like, when people come to tour, they're like, where is the actual teacher? You know, so.
Yeah, well, awesome. Yeah, well, I'd love to see it. We'll have to figure out a time there. But thank you for your time, Eric, Nicki. To the listener, if you have not already subscribed, hit subscribe wherever you're listening to. BetterLearningPodcast.com is the hub for everything. And, you know, the listeners of the show know we're always looking at for a variety from different viewpoints, from people that are actively in those school leadership roles to people supporting, and then obviously change makers outside of education too. What can we learn from other industries, other people that we can apply to what we're doing here? So
Nicki and I would love for y'all to check out our brand new book, Personalize, Meeting the Needs of All Learners. And there she is with the book. It's so important to understand that when it comes to learning, there is not just one right way. And this book is for all educators, regardless of position.
the views and opinions expressed on the Better Learning Podcast are those of myself as an individual and my guests, and do not necessarily represent the organizations that we work for, the Association for Learning Environments, K-12, Education Leaders Organization, or Second Class Foundation.